Chris Lee and Chase Robinson here to preview Georgia Southern's trip to Ole Miss on Saturday night. You can catch that 6:45 on the SEC Network. Ole Miss a 35.5-point favorite on Wednesday morning with an over-under of 67. That makes for an implied final score of Ole Miss 51, Georgia Southern 16. My model has got Ole Miss by 34. Chase, the Rebels have just been super impressive through 3 games so far. I thought Wake Forest would be the biggest test they'd have. And it wasn't the fact that Ole Miss scored points. It's the fact that they held a Wake Forest offense with that slow mesh, which is tough to stop. Dave Clawson's had a history of producing offenses to put up points on people, holding them to 6 points. I think that's the thing. Ole Miss is so good on both sides of the ball, and now it's got what frankly should be kind of a tune-up game this week with Georgia Southern. Won't be a pushover maybe like some other games that they played, but still Ole Miss in a pretty good position coming into this one, to say the least.
They're in a great position. I mean, you're right. They're so good on both sides of the ball, and that's what stands out to me. When we think Lane Kiffin, we think, oh, dynamic offense. And yes, they do have one. There's no doubt about that. But I love what they're doing defensively and the stops they're making, the personnel they have. Pete Golding, bright defensive mind as the defensive coordinator. Yeah, I really like this Ole Miss team offensively, but certainly really like what they're doing defensively as well.
Georgia Southern comes into this 2-1. The Eagles used to run kind of that triple option offense. Now it's under different style under Clay Helton, who I think has worked with Lane Kiffin before, that lost a game to Boise State 56-45 to open the season. Narrow wins over Nevada and South Carolina State. So 2-1 and maybe look at it going almost could have been 3-0 in this one. But let me tell you a little bit about that offense they've got in terms of the stats. Georgia Southern is averaging 66 snaps a game, 35.7 points, turning it over just 0.5% of the time, running it 41% of the time, 4.3 yards per rushing play, 6.4 per passing play. Ole Miss's defense been pretty good. Allowing just 3 points a game, a 3% turnover rate. Teams are throwing it 60% of the time. They are getting 1.7 yards a run play, 5.1 a pass play. That 1.7 yards per pass play, that adjusts for sacks. That is the best number in the league so far, which if you'd watch us in the preseason, you're not totally surprised about because we said, look what they did on the defensive line in terms of what they did in the portal. So the schedule has played a part in that. They hadn't exactly played a whiz-bang running team, but still – the talent is the main reason for what we got here. How do you see this side of the matchup and what Georgia Southern brings and what Ole Miss can do to stop it, Chase?
Well, Georgia Southern, you mentioned Clay Helton. He was actually the offensive coordinator under Lane Kiffin at USC when Lane was the head coach there. When Lane was fired, Clay Helton eventually was the interim coach for the bowl game that season. And so they know each other. They've worked together. And I like what Helton has done at Georgia Southern. You mentioned it. They were that rush-heavy offense, but they sling it around now. And I like J.C. French, their quarterback. He's thrown for 776 yards and 6 touchdowns this season and no interceptions so far through their first 3 games. They hung in there really good with Boise State. It was a 37-36 lead for Georgia Southern going into the fourth quarter of that game. And Boise made some big-time plays down the stretch. 56-45 was the final there. They've gotten 2 wins since then. But I do think this can be a dangerous offense. But like I said, with Ole Miss, this defense is elite. And there's not going to be many offenses across anywhere that are going to be able to put a lot of points on Ole Miss. And so I think this defense is just so good. Even if Georgia Southern does have a good offense, which I think it's pretty good, they're not going to be able to work much against this Ole Miss defense.
I want to talk about Ole Miss's defense in a second, but quickly a reminder, BetOnline presents our content. It is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. It has every stat, every matchup, even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff. Get in on our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, head on to our online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet online. The game starts here. For Ole Miss, I think everything starts with that rushing defense in my mind. You got Walter Nolen. You got Umamielen that transfer from Florida. They've got depth at linebacker. We've talked about what they've got in the secondary. But I think if you're going to beat Ole Miss, you need to slow the game down. And they've been so stout against the run so far. That's what makes, among other things, them problematic.
For sure. And they've been so good at that. And I don't see them stopping being good at that anytime soon with the players that they have. So, that's going to make it very difficult on Georgia Southern. I feel like for sure that them being not being able to really slow it down.
Yeah, other side of the ball, good grief. These guys are just, and speaking from someone that owns a lot of Ole Miss shares in our fantasy football contest, Jaxson Dart is putting up Heisman-level numbers. We'll need to see what that looks like against the better teams on the schedule. Henry Parrish has been so consistent out of that backfield. They've got Tre Harris, who may be the best receiver in the league. Jordan Watkins had 1 catch for 75 last week. Juice Wells still around. Parrish gets the ball. They got Caden Prieskhorn, maybe the best tight end in the league. I mean, just a wealth of talent there in Oxford on offense. But, look, if you watch the SEC, you already know that. The stats. Ole Miss's offense so far, the numbers have been incredible. 56 points a game, 78 snaps a game, turnover rate 1.7%, 7.2 yards per running play, 10.3 per passing play, 8.9 yards per snap. Ole Miss will throw it 51% of the time. As for Georgia Southern's defense, here are the numbers: 29 points a game, 71 snaps a game, 1.4% turnover rate, 6.9 yards per running play, 6.9 yards per passing play. The trouble here, if you're Georgia Southern, is you've just been run on to death. And those are sack-adjusted numbers. I have a feeling Henry Parrish, Jaxson Dart could have a field day against these guys. They can throw the ball too, as we know it. But Lane Kiffin has been a little more run heavy than pass heavy in his tenure. And that stat for Georgia Southern is super problematic against this team.
It is, yeah. It's going to be very tough. Marquise Watson-Trent is the leading tackler for Georgia Southern. He's got 28 on the season, also a forced fumble and a quarterback hurry. So they're going to try to utilize him a good bit. But yeah, it's going to be tough for the Georgia Southern defense. There's no other way to put it. Because Ole Miss can hurt you in so many different ways. Like you said, they can run the ball well. I feel like they'll do that a lot. They can throw the ball well. I mean, Ole Miss has the best of every world on this team this year. And it'll be a problem for Georgia Southern having to stop these guys in every way that they're good. There's a lot of strengths for Ole Miss, and they're tough to stop.
All right, picks. I think we've already kind of tipped our hand on this, but you go first.
Yeah, Ole Miss in a huge win over Georgia Southern. I think, again, they keep rolling. They keep putting up a lot of points and getting people believing in what's going on in Oxford, Mississippi.
Yeah, initially you look at this game and you go, okay, Ole Miss is kind of due for a letdown. You got a game with Kentucky next week to start conference play. Georgia Southern, a team that, as we pointed out, played with Boise State, which could be your group of 5 team that makes the playoff. But then I think that rushing stat on defense is so problematic. Ole Miss is just going to be able to control the line of scrimmage, control the clock, keep their offense off the field. This feels like a game. I don't know if Ole Miss will cover the spread at some point. It felt like that's been an automatic play. Just take them in the points every week. I've got a little question about it this week just because I feel like it's due to come down to earth a little bit, but I wouldn't rule it out either given that rushing stat. So we'll be here to talk about it later. Best way to get that, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, enable your notifications. We cover football, baseball, and basketball here year-round on the channel. And advertising inquiries, caroline.smith@southeastern14.com for more info. For Chase Robinson, I am Chris Lee. We are Southeastern 16, presented by Bet Online.